Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we have another top 10 list for you all. Today I'm going to share with you guys my top 10 board games from the year 2009. Now every once in a while I like to make a list covering games from one particular calendar year, and today I'm going to be covering the year 2009. So these games are already now 13 years old and have been out for some time. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list with my number 10 board game published in the year 2009, and that is Steam, Rails to Riches by Martin Wallace. And this is actually a re-implementation of Martin Wallace's classic Age of Steam. And it's a little bit of a streamline and simplification of that game. And basically, this is a train-themed pick up and delivery game. Very much an economic simulation, because what players are trying to do is they're trying to score points in the form of their income. And there's lots of actions that players are taking throughout the course in the game. At the beginning of each round, players are actually going to be bidding to draft particular bonuses that are going to grant them special or additional abilities when they carry out specific actions. And throughout the course of the game, players are taking lots of different actions. They're laying down rail or laying down tracks in order to create connections between cities. They are using their actions in order to transport cubes representing different goods to other cities that have the demand for that particular colored cube. They're also taking actions that allow them to increase their income. Lots of different things that are taking place. Sometimes you even have to borrow from money that you do not have, and you end up lowering your income to the negative. And that's something you do not want, because you want your income to rise, because that is how you win the game. It's a cool, neat game. It's number 10 because for whatever reason, it doesn't resonate with me or with those who I game with as much as some of the other games on the list. But I can appreciate the brilliance of the design and can only imagine Age of Steam a heavier original to this version, and how good it must be. My number 10 board game from 2009, Steam. And now we move on to my number 9 board game from 2009, and that is Middle-earth Quests. And this here is designed by Corey Kineska and Christian T. Peterson, and was published by Fantasy Flight Games. Now this game here is out of print, and there are a few games on this list that's out of print once games have been out for so long, as far back as 2009. Some of these games are not going to remain in circulation. And Middle-earth Quest went out of print pretty early and never came back. And that might indicate a little bit about the game. Now, first of all, this is a Middle-earth, as it's titled, J.R.R. Tolkien themed game. And it actually takes place sometime before the trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it's not necessarily covering that story. As a matter of fact, none of the characters in this game are the hobbits. You do not find the hobbits in this game. You do find some of the other characters like Gandalf and Legolas and Gimli, I believe, is in this game as well. And this is basically a one versus all adventure game where one player takes on the role of the game, the role of the overlord, and 3 other players, or up to 3 other players, take on the role of different characters and heroes in Middle-earth. Different people from the humans, from the dwarves, from the elves, and they're collaborating and working together to stop the overlord. And basically the overlord is expanding his influence throughout all of these different locations across Middle-earth. The board consists of a map of Middle-earth, and basically you want to expand your influence as far beyond Mordor as possible. And the heroes are doing the opposite. They're trying to break that influence, because the more cities that you connect to your original strongholds as the overlord player, the more powerful you're going to become, and the more negative actions you're going to be able to do to hurt your opponents, the good guys, the heroes, the more monsters you're going to be able to place on the board, the more different types of cards you're going to be able to play. Now, the game does come with 3 different scenarios, so basically you can play this game 3 different ways with 3 different possible objectives. So that adds a little bit of variability. There are a decent amount of characters for the heroes to choose from, but other than that, not enough to give this game longevity, and the fact that it went out of print meant that it never had any expansions added to it. But it's fun if you like the Middle-earth universe, and if you like longer fantasy-themed games and the one versus all format, this is a game you might want to consider. My number 9 board game from the year 2009, Middle-earth Quest. And now we move on to my number 8 board game from 2009, and that is Small World. And this is a fan favorite here. Originally published by Days of Wonder Games. And this is a fantasy-themed area control game where players are basically taking on a role of fantasy races, and they're trying to occupy and control as much regions as possible on the map, because that's going to earn them victory points. And after a predetermined amount of rounds, 8 or 10, depending on the player count, the player with the most victory points will be the winner of the game. Now, this game has a couple really neat features from a design perspective. First of all, it comes with 4 maps. It comes with 2 boards, 2 double-sided boards that has 4 maps, so that depending on the player count, whether it be 2, 3, 4, or 5, it's totally balanced, and there's just enough space for players to contend over, but not too much for them to get comfortable, because it really forces you and presses you and incentivizes you to expand and to partake in combat and conflict in order to take over these different lands. Now, the combat here is deterministic for the most part. You just have to have more strength in one area than your opponent, and you're pretty much guaranteed a success. And as you do this, you got to decide when you want to stop, because as you dwindle down your forces, it's very hard to get additional forces in this game. Sometimes units are permanently removed from the game, and they do not remain in your pool accessible to you for the rest of the game. So as the game progresses, you have to make the very difficult decision of declining your race. Basically, you're moving on from them, and you're going to draft a different race. And this game comes with lots of different races, and each race has a unique special ability, a different way of scoring, and a different amount of units that you have in your supply. Also, there's a second tile referred to as the power tiles, and these are modular. They combine with the race tiles, and you could have so many possible combinations, and these power tiles give an additional ability. So the amount of abilities that players can find, the variety, is endless, even just in the base game alone. Really cool. I have grown a little cold on the game over the years, but it's still a classic and has some very brilliant design features to it, which is why it's still my number 8 board game from the year 2008, Small World. And now we move on, 2009 I should say. Now we move on to my number 7. And my number 7 board game from 2009 is Carson City. And this here is the deluxe edition that comes with all the expansions. And Carson City is basically a worker placement, area control, city building game with lots of cool, neat elements. The board consists of this grid that players are going to be placing their parcel tiles on in order to claim ownership over it. And they're also going to be building different buildings. And these buildings are going to score the owners of them points according to whatever the conditions are. Sometimes the topographical features around it, whether it be mountains or empty areas, sometimes the buildings that might be adjacent to the building in question, all these things can impact how the building itself scores. And there's so many different buildings to factor in. Now, players are going to partake in a worker placement. They're going to place their workers down in each of these locations, and it's very interesting because you're going to carry out the actions not in the order that the workers were placed. You're going to wait till all workers are placed down, and then you're going to go through this track all the way through in order until one by one each of these actions are activated. And the cool thing about this game is that it has an area control element and a worker placement element, but your workers can engage in combat with one another in duels. And this game innovated that mechanism, that Wild West flavored mechanism of dueling for worker placement spots. You place your worker in a spot that someone else had already placed their worker, and then you engage in combat. And the combat is determined by your power. And your power is usually relegated to the amount of guns you have. There's a token that you collect throughout the course of the game, which represents your firepower, these pistols, and you turn them in and they represent your power. However, each of your unused workers that are still in your ranch, they're also going to contribute to your power. So you're incentivized to not use all your workers during the course of the round, because that will increase your chances of winning a duel. Another really cool thing is, as you end the round, and there's 4 rounds in this game, every time you end a round, all your used workers are going to be permanently removed from the game, which is a very novel idea. Most worker placement games, your workers are a pool that you will keep on. You can add on to that pool, but you can always count on the base value of what that pool is. In this game, you're going to start the game with like 4 workers. After the end of the round, each of those that were used, they're all going to get discarded. Then in the second round, you're going to start with a new pool of workers, and each subsequent round, your base value or your default pool is a little bit higher than the previous round. Also, any unused workers from the previous round can be saved and added to that additional pool for the following round. So that's a way of having a mega round. You save 2 or 3 workers from a previous round. You collect 4 or 5 workers for the following round. All of a sudden, you got 7, 8, 9 workers to take lots of actions for that particular round. Lots of really cool things. I like the Wild West flavor of the game. My number 7 board game from the year 2009, Carson City. Now we move on to my number 6. And my number 6 board game from 2009, it's a game I talk about a lot on this channel, and that is Dice Town by Bruno Cathala and Ludovic Mablanc, and published by Matago Games. And Dice Town here is another Wild West game, just like Carson City was, except this game is radically different mechanically speaking. This is not a worker placement game. Instead, this is a dice rolling game, a little bit like Yahtzee, but it's more like a roll and lock. Players are going to start with their pool of 5 dice, and these dice represent their poker hand, and each of the faces of the die has a different suit and a different card type. Here you got the 10 of hearts, you got your jacks over here, and your queens, and your kings, and you're going to be rolling these dice, and typically speaking, you're rolling, locking 1, rolling, locking 1, rolling, locking 1, until you have a hand of 5 dice. Now, there are ways of mitigating the dice rolling, and re-rolling, and maybe locking multiple dice at one time. And basically what players are trying to do is they're trying to get particular combinations, or at least majorities, in different card types in order to unlock the benefits from these different locations in Dice Town. And each of these locations grant you special abilities that ultimately are going to get you victory points and help you come out victorious at the end of the game. Some of these locations are a little bit more about special abilities throughout the course of the game. The sheriff, for example, allows you to break ties whenever there's a tie for who has the best of a particular card type or the poker hand overall. The saloon here allows you to steal cards from other players. The general store allows you to draft cards that are either going to be victory points or grant you special abilities throughout the course of the game. And it's such a cool, fun game. So enjoyable. I do like playing with the Wild West expansion that adds additional benefits from each of the locations in the city. That way you don't necessarily have to have just the best in a particular card type to benefit from that city space. If you have the second best, you'll have a little bit of a consolation prize. So I like that a lot. My number 6 board game from the year 2009, Dice Town. And now we move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop, my 5 favorite board games from the year 2009, starting with my number 5, which is Summoner Wars. And Summoner Wars is a tactical card game with a spatial component to it. And I've seen other games copy this idea, but no one has done it as well and as early as Summoner Wars. It's kind of like the innovator in this gimmick of card play, where spatially you're actually moving your cards. Your cards kind of serve as miniatures. And the game comes with a mat, which is a grid, which consists of all the spaces that your cards, your different character cards, are actually going to move through. And basically you're engaging in combat. You got all of your different character cards. You got your champions, and you have your summoners, which are basically your bosses. They're the most powerful of all, and that's actually the end game condition. Your goal ultimately is to knock your opponent's summoner down to 0 health. However, the summoner is the strongest character on that opponent's army, and all the other champions that they place on the grid are going to be protecting and defending that guardian, that summoner. Also, you're going to have some wall cards, which basically not only serve as a block from you and your opponent, but those are going to be spawning areas where you can place down future creatures and characters that you're going to summon. That's actually where they're going to start, adjacent to a wall that you control. There's different event cards. It's really cool because every time you kill an opponent, their card goes into your magic pile. And at the end of your turn, you can voluntarily put some of your cards into your magic pile. And the magic pile is basically a currency. That magic pile is going to allow you to pay for the summoning of different cards, whether it be event cards or different champions and characters and wall cards. You're going to need that magic supply. So that's really cool because the more characters you defeat, the more you add to your magic supply. But sometimes you also have to discard your own cards, and voluntarily so, on a previous turn, in order to be ready for the next turn to have enough magic in your supply to cast and summon those additional creatures. I find it to be really cool. There's so many different factions that you can pick from, and each faction is asymmetric with different benefits, different advantages and disadvantages. My number 5 board game from the year 2009, Summoner Wars. And now we move on to my number 4 from the year 2009, and that is At the Gates of Loyang, designed by Uwe Rosenberg. And At the Gates of Loyang is a really cool, underrated Uwe Rosenberg game where players are basically taking on the role of merchants who are planting farms and reaping from these farms in order to sell them to customers. And the challenge in this game is that there are 2 different types of customers. You have your casual customers who are usually asking for 3 different veggie types, and they're going to pay you a little bit more than your regular customers. However, they're only going to come one time. So once you've met their demand one time, they will pay you their money and they will be on their way. However, you also have regular customers. And the regular customers, they pay you a little bit less than your casual customers. However, they're going to come to you 4 times. And you're going to be able to fulfill their demands 4 times potentially in order to get money multiple times. Now, the cool thing about your regular customers is that you're really challenged, because if you ever fail to meet their demands 2 turns in a row, then you're going to be penalized and you're going to have to pay some gold. And the gold is very valuable in this game because you're going to use your gold to advance up this prosperity track. And each space is going to cost more and more gold to get there. So in order to climb up as far as you can on this prosperity track, which is ultimately your end game score, you're going to have to use that money wisely. So ideally, you do not want to fail these customers more than 2 times in a row. And you want to have a balance of not having more casual customers than regular customers, because once you have more casual customers than regular customers, even your casual customers start paying you less. So you want to make sure that you have more regular customers, even though they come with those challenges. So many really cool things going on in this game. I love the components, really nice veggie meeples here that add to the ambiance and to the experience. My number 4 board game from the year 2009, At the Gates of Loyang. And my number 3 board game from the year 2009 is Thunderstone Quest. And Thunderstone Quest here is a deck building game that was originally published in the year 2009. However, this is the 3rd iteration, a few years after they made the 2nd edition. And now here we have the Quest edition. And basically the Quest edition just makes this a full-blown out dungeon crawl where you have 2 board areas. You have one area which is referred to as the village. That's where you go to recruit characters and allies. That's where you go to buy items. That's where you go to buy spells. That's where you go to buy weapons. That is where you go to heal your characters. That's where you go to find legendary items that you can use. And that's where you go to get food and different lanterns and healing potions. However, the heart of the game is going to the dungeon, where you're going to fight different monsters of different varying levels of experience. And you're going to gain experience points every time you defeat these monsters. However, you're also going to suffer wounds. And there's 2 different wounds. There's wounds that actually directly impact your character, which eventually will make your hand size decrease. Or there's wound cards that actually go into your deck. And these cards are detrimental because not only are they negative points at the end of the game, but they clog up your deck with weak cards that don't do anything for you. And you're trying to find and strike the right balance of going to the village but also going to the dungeon, because again, the dungeon is your experience points. And at the same time, you're using these experience points to level up your characters, which come in the form of cards. This is a deck building game, as I mentioned earlier. And it's so cool because basically, when you level up, you basically get rid of a weaker card and replace it with a more powerful card. So your deck always stays small and contained and predictable. This is not one of those deck building games where your deck becomes enormous and unmanageable. You're going to have a pretty good idea of what cards you might draw because your deck is always going to stay relatively small due to that experience point mechanism where you call a card and replace it with a more powerful version of itself. I find this to be a really cool game. The base game alone has tons of heroes, a couple of guardians, and a lot of different monsters to choose from, lots of different items and weapons and spells. My number 3 board game from the year 2009, Thunderstone Quest. My number 2 board game from the year 2009 is Cyclades, and this is designed by Ludovic Mablanc and Bruna Cathala. So they were very busy this year because they also designed Dice Town from earlier. And this is a Greek-themed area control game where players are trying to take over the different isles, the different Cyclades isles, and basically establish different buildings there. They're establishing forts, and they're establishing ports, and they're establishing temples and universities. And basically when they have established all 4 different building types, they'll be able to replace them with a metropolis. And once a player has 2 metropolises in their control, in all of their collective islands, then they will be the winner of the game. But getting to that is quite a bit of a challenge because throughout the course of the game, each round, players are going to partake in an auction for the different gods. And there are 5 different gods in this game that you'll be auctioning for. You got Zeus, you got Ares, you got Poseidon, you got Apollo, and you got Athena. And each of them grant you different abilities. They grant you different rights as far as the different actions you could take. They grant you particular cards. They grant you the right to build particular buildings that contribute towards these metropolises. So lots of really cool things as far as that, but it also will determine the turn order. You might bid for one god, not necessarily because of the power they give you, but where they randomly ended up on that round's turn order. Lots of cool things taking place in this game. You got mythological creatures that you can use to your advantage. You're using a little bit of a network connection to connect boats to the different isles in order to be able to efficiently and effectively move your troops throughout those isles. Cool stuff. I like the Greek theme. I like the way the game takes place, the way the game plays. My number 2 board game from the year 2009, Cyclades. And now we move on to my number 1, my absolute favorite game for the year 2009, and that is Macao, designed by Stefan Feld. And this game here, long out of print. As I mentioned, some of these games here are out of print. Some of them have been reprinted and re-implemented, like in the case of Thunderstone Quest. Macao has also been re-implemented. Unfortunately, it has not been able to keep the name Macao. Just recently, Queen's Games republished or remade Macao. Same idea, same mechanics, however, with a different city pasted on as the theme for the game. But the cool thing about this game, the multiple things about this game, first of all, it has these cards. I love games that have cool, innovative card play. And basically, these cards kind of serve as contracts, where if you're drafting these cards and eventually you're running out of space of cards to draft, and that's something you want to factor in. But if you can eventually collect these particular colored cubes that you find on the upper left-hand corner of each of these cards, then you'll be able to place it on your player board and have its ability, its special ability, available to you going forward. So that's something to keep in mind. When you draft a card, you've got to think about your card limit, but you also have to think about how realistic it is for you to get the particular colored cubes that you're going to need in order to activate it. And the colored cubes are the heart of the game because at the beginning of each round, you're going to roll dice and basically you're going to place cubes corresponding to the numbers that you rolled and corresponding with the color of the dice, right? Because you have dice here that match all of the different colored cubes in the game. And based on what you roll on that die, that's going to determine where you place the cubes. So if you roll a 1 for the red, you're going to put 1 red cube here on the 1 spot on this windmill here. If you roll 2 blacks, you'll put 2 blacks here. If you roll 3 greens, you'll put 3 greens here. If you roll 4 blues, you'll put 4 blues here. And if you roll 5 purples, you'll put 5 purples here. And of course, there's an option for 6. So depending on the number you roll and the color you roll, you're going to put the cubes there. And that's going to tell you when the cubes are going to be available. So some of these cubes are going to be available 1 round from now. Some of these cubes are going to be available 2 rounds from now, but there's going to be more cubes. Some of them won't be available for 6 rounds, but it's going to be a good amount of cubes. And these different cubes are going to grant you additional actions that you can take, including the activation of your character cards here. So each player is going to choose 2 colors to place down on the windmill, and basically they're determining what they need. They can plan and strategically get ready for long term, but sometimes you want to be ready to do something in the short term. You want to be ready to do something this current round. So sometimes you might be forced to, or you feel pressured and compelled to take the one of something that's rolled in order to have it available to you right then and right there. I find this and manipulating this entire concept along with these cards over here and the point salad that Steppenfeld is known for, scoring points in so many different ways. You're doing a little bit of a pickup and delivery where you're using your ships here. You got a meeple that's is your ships, and you're moving it to the different islands in order to deliver particular goods that those islands are coveting, and you collect those goods by going to these different locations in the city spaces here. There's also a little bit of a route connection, because if you link particular places to each other, that'll grant you bonus points as well. This game also has a feature that's very common in Steppenfeld games, where you have a game within the game as far as the turn order is concerned. You've got this little turn order track. Really cool, lots of neat things going on in this game. I really like it. My favorite board game from the year 2009, Macao. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here at Harriman Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this list of 10 games. Have you played any games from 2009? Perhaps you haven't. I know lots of people only play the games that have come out the last few years. But if you are open to older games that are more established, some of these games hopefully can inspire you guys and give you some ideas. Well, again, I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say in the comment section down below. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.